The interesting thing about interoperability is we focus a little bit too much on DRM interoperability. I mean, we can actually deliver interoperable product today. MP3 files are interoperable. The moment you stick a DRM on it, of course, it lacks interoperability. There are technical solutions around that kind of interoperability, and there's standard setting activities going on right now to try to figure out how to do it. Ultimately, you'd want interoperability on the client, so consumers don't have to go back to the cloud and download more content. But the bottom line on interoperability, if you think about it for a moment, once you nail the transport layer and the codec layer, you have interoperability for your photos and your home movies, but you're not going to get any kind of premium content because you need a DRM interoperability. There are a lot of people who think that once you get DRM interoperability, you're done. It's now interoperable, right? Technically, they're right. You would have interoperability from client to client if you stop at the DRM side of things. But if you think about it for a moment, from a consumer standpoint, if I've bought content, let's assume there are two stores, store A and store B, and both are delivering to me the exact same file format, same DRM. One might just stop there and say, okay, I have interoperability. But you don't really have interoperability, because if store one is selling a usage model, let's say the usage model is 2 PCs and 2 portables, and the other store is selling 1 PC, 1 portable, and 1 DVD burn, and I'm aggregating content locally on the client, and 6 months from now, I go to make 2 copies of Spider-Man for my kids on their portable devices, but I don't remember, I bought it from store B, I only have 1 portable and 1 DVD burn, or I've just burned Spider-Man, and now I go to burn Batman, I didn't buy it from the store that was offering me the burn rights. So technically, you have interoperability, but because the usage model is different, from a consumer standpoint, it still lacks interoperability, because when the consumer tries to do something, not remembering where they bought the content from and what the usage model was in connection with the purchase of the content, the consumers will get confused. And once the consumers get confused and start hitting boundaries, trying to do something that they can't do because they don't understand it, in my opinion, from the consumer standpoint, it lacks interoperability. So as you move up this stack for interoperability, you have to tackle transport, codec, DRM, and a common usage model. And as we know today, the way digital distribution is rolling out, there is no common usage model across these storefronts. And I think that's going to be problematic as we try to actually tackle the technical side of interoperability.
What do you guys, as an industry, learn from the music industry's problems? Are there lessons to be learned, and how might that benefit you, your industry?
Well, I've always thought the music industry is the canary in our coal mine. And while I don't think the canary is necessarily dead, it's not breathing very well anymore. So the lessons we can learn from the music industry are many. I mean, I don't even know where to start, quite frankly. But one lesson in the music industry that I'm very concerned about, or I should say one lesson from the music industry that I want to make sure that I incorporate as part of my being, is the fear of being commoditized. Because once the perceived value of the product that we're selling gets to the point where we're commoditized, very, very difficult to increase the price. A good example was, if you remember, after iTunes launched, there was another music storefront that was offering higher fidelity MP3 files that were unencrypted, and they were charging 20 cents more, I think $1.19 per track. Never took off, because the perceived value was already established at 99 cents. When I think about the music industry, I think about a promotion I once saw, I think it was Pepsi, I could be wrong, it could have been Coke, where they were offering, if you buy a Pepsi and you unscrew the cap, you'd get free music. Well, in my opinion, what they were basically telling the consumer is that music is free. And as a result, the music industry's, I think music tracks have been commoditized at 99 cents. When you value the song that gets the most radio play at the same price that you value the song that gets no radio play, something's wrong with that business model. So the one thing I take away from the music industry is that I would have rather had the music industry turn it around and say, buy a CD and get a free bottle of Coke, than buy Coke and get free music. So I'm very careful, and one thing I've learned anything, it's avoid commoditization of your product, otherwise you're going to lose revenue, and which is not healthy for any industry, and it's certainly not healthy for the music industry.
Hey Mitch, let me ask you, my daughter is watching a movie on Netflix online the other night, which is pretty cool. Logged in, watched it. We also order the Netflix, through the mail. Tell us about sort of what you think the evolution of consuming theatrical, high-quality videos at home will be, and how that might develop through the DVDs, through video on demand, through these, streaming services that we're seeing now from Netflix. Where do you think that's going?
I think the most important thing we can actually learn about digital distribution is the ability to give consumers a lot more choice than we've ever been able to give them before. So when I think of a consumer being able to order it on video on demand, or pay for a subscription, or to own it, I think that we're getting pretty close to offering the consumer a lot of flexibility. And the next thing we actually need to do that's even more important than the different business models is to actually start honing in on the problem that I just talked slightly about earlier, and that is, how do we develop a digital product that takes advantage of all the technology that we see around us, that enables a consumer all the additional flexibility that a consumer might want when they buy product online? Because we know consumers are collectors. And the question is, we know they're collecting DVDs, but they seem to be streaming digital content. So how do we create a better digital product for the consumer that gives them the kind of choice that I think the consumer needs? One example for a moment is, if you think about, what does it mean to buy digital content today? What does ownership mean for digital content? I know what ownership means when I buy a DVD. I know I can buy it from multiple storefronts. I know I can play it cross-platform. Because the DVD was based upon an open standard and there was horizontal competition, we saw a lot of innovation happening on the player side. We saw DVDs start to develop not only in the player, but in PCs, in automobiles, in laptops, in the sides of TVs, in set-top boxes. So when we saw that kind of innovation happen in the DVD space, adding on to that the fact that consumers could buy it from multiple storefronts, all of a sudden we saw a product that consumers migrated to. But today, what does it mean when you digitally deliver content to a consumer? Well, consumers have to make a technology decision before buying content. Many times consumers are locked into a platform. So if I buy content, for example, from iTunes, I'm locked into iTunes. And consumers don't have that kind of flexibility. So how do we break open the marketplace when a consumer purchases content? So not only can they play it cross-platform, but they can buy it at multiple storefronts. They can actually store it in a rights locker and access it anywhere they are in the world. They can burn optical media, whether it's a DVD or a memory stick or some other kind of physical media. How do we start to develop that kind of a product for a consumer so consumers don't even have to think about circumvention as a tool? When we start going down that path, I think then we've really hit on something. When we can identify a digital product with a logo, not as a service or a technology, not a logo identifying a place for sure, for example, but a logo identifying the product like a DVD. Think about a DVD today. I buy Spider-Man 3. I don't think of MPEG 2. I don't think it's protected with CSS. All I know is I'm buying a DVD and I can play it in a DVD player. That's really where we need to migrate on digital distribution in order to develop this product and then develop an architecture where consumers actually have a lot more choice. I mean, how cool would it be if I were driving home and I got a trailer down on my mobile phone and all of a sudden I pressed the buy button and when I got home it was sitting on my hard drive device at home, magically appeared. And then when I'm over at your house, because I've purchased the content, I can access a website and stream the content that I've already purchased. We're doing that today with email, right? I could send you photos and music on email. You don't even think about the fact that you're not downloading it onto your client. It's up in Yahoo somewhere. Doesn't matter where you are in the world, you sign on to Yahoo and you access your photo. I think movies and television programs and other content that you purchase should be treated the same way. So how do we migrate to that kind of a product? And if we can do that and give consumers all kinds of choice, that goes back to trying to combat piracy in many ways. That's a product that I think consumers would rather own. Because even when you download content, you're not going to get that kind of service associated with the product. So when I think about all the digital technology that's available today, it's incumbent upon us, the entertainment industry, the guys who are producing movies and distributing movies, to package it together in a way that consumers finally get what they want. And I think if we can do that, and I think we can, then I think we'll kind of break many of the barriers that exist today, especially with interoperability.
What are the challenges to the industry in actually pulling this vision together that you've articulated so well? How could it happen, or when might it happen?
Well, I think, you know, it's all a matter of timing. We've seen so many companies try to develop back-end services for consumers and quite frankly fail. And I could go through a whole list of companies who've either developed the back-end services and never launched, or launched and then left. And if you think about it for a moment, if you're building a service, and the reason you're building the service is you want to be profitable, why would you limit the service to a single device? And if you have a device strategy that you're building a service because you want the service to deliver content to your device because it's more of a device strategy, then why would you ever want to limit your device to a single service? So I think things are in motion now where a lot of companies are starting to think a little bit differently about developing these back-end services. Look, think about it for a moment. I want to compete against Apple. What do I need to do? Well, I need to develop a back-end service. I need to do all the content licensing deals. I need to do a CDN deal. I need to build applications, UIs, customer service. That's a lot. It's a big engine that I need to do. We seem to forget that when Apple launched iTunes, iPod had already been in the marketplace for, I think, a year. It had already captured 70 to 80% of MP3 players. So if you think about it, here's Apple setting up a service. They're not limited at all by device penetration. They have 70% market share. Here you are, another company, and you can name the companies. I don't necessarily want to name them here. And all of a sudden, they build out the same back-end service. They have to feed it with the same revenue stream to keep that engine in the back end going, and yet their device penetration is 1/10 of 1%, or 1%, or 2%. How can you continue feeding this back end service if you're limited by device penetration? So one of the things that we need to do, as I said earlier, that, and I think your question was, when is this going to happen, or why now, is that I think a lot of companies are starting to realize that they're so limited by device penetration when they're developing the back end service, and it's so expensive to actually develop this back-end service, that unless there's a way to open up the marketplace, they're gonna have a difficult time entering the marketplace. So there are a lot of companies that are thinking about this now, about how do we open up the marketplace and give consumers a lot more choice and freedom than they have today. And I think that once we start focusing on the consumer a little bit more than maybe we have focused in the past, I think a lot of things will change.